or what I've talked about here briefly today. Yes?
I work at Sematech. So your last statement on how we switch hats between our companies and Sematech, I think at that time, while I was working there, when we set the goal for Sematech and what we should achieve, we put our company hat on because that's what we will get back for our customer. But when we discuss about the task of what needs to be done to achieve that goal, then we put the Sematech hats on.
Well, that's instructive. That's instructive about how that model worked and what phases you had on which hat as a part of that. And the return on investment, I think that the general belief was that was a contribution that Bill Spencer made to focus more on their ROI and to show local companies more as to why they should continue to invest in Sematech.
Yes, and I think they said the best of their engineers because of the return on investment, and also knowing that their engineer will be working on the leading edge of the technology and bringing it back to the company once they return to the company.
And I think they fairly strongly believe that kind of human being is the carrier of the knowledge. They went back to their home company was that was something you couldn't get from a report. That participating directly with these people was how you got it in your head in a more familiar and tacit way of what this was about.
So what was the enemy mentality developed among the U.S. corporation? Was it competition?
I could only guess at that. I think it was. They were fiercely competitive at the time, and they were so fiercely competitive that they overlooked. They thought innovation was the answer to everything, and so as long as we're innovating, manufacturing was kind of de-emphasized as that's what someone else does. We're innovative, and what the Japanese showed them in the mid-'80s was no, that's not really true. They had to have, and not only that, but you had to have the manufacturing success to get the money to lead the next innovation. So if you missed out on a loop or missed out on a phase of the development, you were really out of luck. So that was the urgency that drove that, and the urgency that drove the competitiveness, at least in part.
May I add a little bit more to
Sure.
what you said? Originally, when Sematech first formed, they were going to work on improving the manufacturing process of making the semiconductor chip. But they realized that's where the proprietary conflict would come in. So they changed the model to working on the tool to improve the way we manufacture. So how you use the tool make a difference between the different companies so they can be competitive. But by working on the tool, they can improve their chances to compete with the Japanese.
Also, at the very beginning, they did not know what they were going to do at Sematech. One of the early, a high-level leader said, we'll make chips since we have all this money. Let's low dollar the integrated circuits and drive the Japanese out of the business. So they went from that goal, and that is to make so many of these things that we swamp the competition to grinding them up as soon as they were made. So it was that lack of clarity at the outset, which is the right way to go to make progress on this project. One is to make all the chips you can and flood the market. The other was to learn the technology that allowed you to use it and spread it to the companies, which is what they eventually did, and grind the chips up if they learned the techniques and procedures from it.
You mentioned that in the beginning, the member companies sent their people out. They were competing because the problem was that they were competing against each other because of the industry.
Right.
Now, they overcame that, but how did the company change from what it used to be Sematech to what it is now, which is an international company?
I know less about that.
That's after. Okay.
And that's where I stopped kind of at the point about 2 years before that started.
Okay.
And I haven't been back in the organization, haven't done interviews. I expect someone else will write a book because there's about, I wrote about a 10-year point basically, and there's about another 10-year point since then. They've celebrated the 20th anniversary, so it's someone else will probably take it. Yeah.
I have a question, and I apologize if you might have answered this before. I just came from a meeting. But the thing I wanted to know is, in your opinion, where do you see the semiconductor industry going in the United States today? Because I know that personally, I've heard mixed reviews in terms of whether some people refer to the semiconductor industry in the United States as a dying art, And I just want to know what you think about that.
You know, if I answered that, it would be out of ignorance. So I really don't know. My understanding is that the whole notion of proprietary was changed greatly by the role of China. And that, I assume that's a driver, at least in part, for why this change would take place. That the notion of proprietary information was greatly defined by the entry of China into a user of the chips. Historically, in the semiconductor industry, if you want to sell it here, you got to make it here. So that's a larger cultural norm that affects that. But at the same time, they also thought the Sematech would be dead in 1990. They thought it was over with then. They didn't realize the demand for laptops and other kinds of computing equipment would continue to grow over that time. So there's been several twists and turns, and I don't know the answer to that. The original forecast at Sematech was the demand for chips in the United States would run to 2020. So that was there in 1990. That's what people were saying. So that was the basis of the development of this area. Without I mean the physical geography of Austin, Texas in the last 20 years has been greatly affected by that, as I'm sure you know.
You mentioned that there was a mission statement that was done every 2 years. And who were the decision makers of that mission statement?
One of the things that I didn't touch on is that Sematech was vertically integrated in a sense that it did have the CEOs, the member companies involved. And as a result of that, there was goal setting at the strategic level by the CEOs of those companies, and there were 2 more levels of boards down to lower technical levels beyond that. And so the changes that took place occurred in such a way that once a change in goals took place, people were on board with it. And as a result of that, there wasn't a lot of a difference over what took place. One of the other things that I could have mentioned is that companies that went to Sematech that didn't have agreement among their own group were weak there. The ones who had agreement at home saying, here's what we're going to Sematech to do, here's our agreement on that, they had more power in the organization because someone else would say, well, they're so-and-so bickering among themselves, let's make a decision as to what we're doing. So one of the things that I learned from that, if you've got a subunit that's working with a larger group, is to your benefit to have your act together before you go in. Because if you have your differences out with others while that's taking place, they're going to win since they're in agreement about what's going on. So that's kind of a little bit of an offshoot to answer, other than to say they were able to make those changes every 2 years, and they were able to do so because it was vertically integrated on the decision making to make those shifts and changes over time.
I prepared some questions as well, and Dr. Boning has been covering a lot on the company levels, and I know he's also an expert in the organizational communications. So I do have a question to how Freescale engineers can use your research on Sematech study to improve our job performance, and I would like you to shed some light on that.
Well, I teach a course in cooperation and competition. First of all, the science and the literature is that universal cooperation doesn't work. You can't say, I will operate in some kind of larger spiritual giving way and the outcome will be good. And the literature we have on that is someone will take advantage of it if you do. So, and that's one of the things that was real clear at Sematech too, and that is you had to have a little bit of an edge so that people believe that if they screwed you, there would be some negative consequence to it. So to be an effective cooperator, you have to have a mean streak too. And for someone to believe that you're willing to give them a thump on the nose if they take advantage of you when you're acting in a cooperative way is important to have. So that was pretty well understood and believed in at Sematech as well. The kindest person in the world is the wrong person to cooperate with. Part of the decision is to avoid being a sucker.